Theatre, film, TV and more. Suzy Wrong reviews it all on Joy Drive with Em and Warren.
Good afternoon, Suzy Wrong.
So it was a good night at the Oscars with films that have prominent gay characters doing very well. Everything Everywhere All at Once and The Whale both won the awards. 7 for Everything All at Once, which was great.
It was so good, and the acceptance speeches, as always, I just don't know how they keep doing it. Every award they get, their speeches are just so beautiful and so poignant and so touching.
I liked the husband, I've forgotten his name, his speech.
Ke Huy Quan, yeah.
Yeah, that was touching.
It was
My
really
mom,
touching.
so cute.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Yeah.
And we've all had, like a 30-year relationship with Ke Huy Quan. I think most of us have seen him as a child. And then he's sort of disappeared a little bit off most of our screens and he's returned in such fabulous form, doing such a great job in this amazing film.
Also just such a in his speech, he says, I'm living the American dream. And there's also been interviews in the past few weeks. This is now his, 5th or 6th individual award for this role, because just absolutely crushed it. But he was like, at one stage when Everything Everywhere All at Once had been made but not released yet, he still wasn't getting any roles because no one had seen him in this film. And it was so bad that he had to cancel his health insurance because he didn't have enough money to have health insurance. And he called one of the directors of Everything Everywhere and was like, hey, I just want to check, is the film great and am I good in it? Because I still am not getting anything. And it wasn't until it was released that finally, the world has a spotlight on him now, which is incredible because he's clearly gone through so much and worked so incredibly hard and overcome so many obstacles. I just think it's a wonderful story.
Do we know if he's got any more roles yet?
I'm pretty sure he's already on his Instagram. It seems like he's working. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully. Well, I guess we're all desperate to see what's going to happen next for these actors. Not just Ke Huy Quan, not just Michelle Yeoh, but also Stephanie Su.
Of course.
Who's amazing and a little bit sort of we haven't been covering her a lot, but she did have a nomination. And also to Jamie
Lee Curtis?
Yeah, Jamie Lee Curtis, yeah.
She was great.
She was great. Yeah, she was great. So.
The tax woman.
with the sausage fingers.
That's right, sausage fingers.
But the thing I love is they're also committed to the movie. Like, Lee will wear like a little googly eye on his suits, and Jamie Lee Curtis will like literally show up to red carpets with sausage fingers. Like, it's just so good. I just love it.
And I feel like people have responding really well to its win. I mean, there will always be haters, but I think that it shows that a lot of people have really enjoyed the film and really taken it quite closely to their hearts. And, just for people who are listening in now who haven't seen it, we definitely encourage you to see it. It's not, you don't have to be Asian to understand or enjoy it. I think it's so well done. I think it talks to everyone with an open heart.
100%, 10 out of 10, highly recommend.
I agree. And whilst we're talking about things that we may all agree on, which I'm suspecting we might, it's Queer Australia that we have been watching on ABC TV and iView. We've seen 2 episodes so far. Suzy, what's Queer Australia about?
QUEERSTRALIA is a 3-part documentary on ABC about LGBTQIA plus history on these lands, reaching all the way back to European invasions in the 18th century and also long before that, with Indigenous stories that add to our understanding of queer life in what we call Australia. QUEERSTRALIA is created, written and presented by the comedian Zoe Coombs-Ma, who at the beginning of the series says, quote, "It's about finding where you fit and where you've come from, because our stories haven't really been told in a whole way, because they're disconnected from each other. When you look at a family tree, you can see people who are connected and that they know each other, whereas you look at queer history, it's often happening in isolation. They're all disconnected, so there's no linear cause and effects. You're not born into a queer family. You have to discover it on your own, and then you have to find where you fit in," unquote. The first episode is entitled The Law, as that is where much of our history is written on paper. So that frames our experiences as a matter of transgression and atrocity from the outset, which is completely commensurate with how many of us have come to recognize where we stand within the scheme of things. Episode 2 is called Gender and Identity, which is self-explanatory, but also surprising in how it forms a consolidation of trans and gay histories to remind us how incredibly closely linked our journeys have been as a rainbow community, even though we can very easily think of ourselves as being completely different from each other. I think QUEERSTRALIA is a very important work by our national broadcaster, not really to make things right, but to have things set in stone as a record and archive so that queer people today and in generations to come are able to have access to a more exhaustive understanding of who we are, even as we become less marginalized through the future years. Emma and Warren, are you looking forward to the concluding portion of the series, Belonging and Community, tonight?
I can't wait to see it tonight. Suzy, I think, you hit the nail on the head then, didn't you, when you said it's not about making things right, it's about giving the history. But I've got to say, I went through a roller coaster of emotions, authentic emotions with this series. You've got anger at stuff, you've got sadness, there's shock, there's everything that goes through that as you're watching the show that goes through your mind. And at the end of it, Suzy, you said it's not about making it right. I felt like something more needs to be done to make it right. That's how I felt after watching 2 episodes of it.
That's really powerful to say, Warren. I mean, where do you go from here? Aside from, we always think in a linear form that we need to move forward. But, people of a certain age, like yourself and myself and those older, we carry so much damage along with us, so much baggage, so much scarring. And I think we cannot survive by ignoring those things. And I guess watching a show like that does give you a certain amount of catharsis, which is important. I did feel the same emotions. A lot of it was sorrowful, and a lot of it was bewilderment. Sometimes I kind of step away from the emotion because it does get intense. Not that it's a heavy thing, but there's a lot of jokes. Zoe Koonsma is a very accomplished comedian, so she frames it in a lot of comedy. So I don't think it's necessarily heavy watching. But I do step out and think, quite bewildering. Why? I think because we've moved so far away from it. Why did people act that way? Where does that hate come from? It's so crazy.
I think, from my perspective, I really enjoyed the series, or at least what we've seen so far. I found it so informative. And I guess from my perspective, as a younger person to both you and Warren, Suzy, it was really, of course, all of the emotions we've just spoken about, bewildering and shocking and all of that. But fundamentally, it was so great to have a comprehensive history in one place, because the whole idea of the beginning of the series is kind of like, we don't have this, it doesn't exist. And what a cool and wonderful resource that younger queer people now have, because we didn't live through the moments that are spoken about in, at least the episodes that we've watched so far. And I imagine probably it's going to come towards the future now in the 3rd episode, because that's how history works. But, as a younger person, I think that it was just such a valuable resource. And I learnt so much. I literally learnt, about, and maybe it was ignorance, but I was 5 in 1997. And that's when Tasmania made, reversed the illegal homosexuality laws in Tasmania, which is wild to think about. Literally, I was shocked. But I literally spoke to some friends about it at dinner last week, because it's now new information that I have, and now we can talk about it and be informed. And I think the more you know, and that's great.
And so much of our real history is not taught in schools. And,
exactly.
And when you look at this stuff, you kind of think that, they are just not going to teach this in schools. Even now, we feel like it's PG watching, but you also know instinctively that they're not going to teach that in school. So important that it's out there. And
I think also, I agree 100% with what you're saying, but I learned a lot as well. I mean, my gay history, I suppose, starts in the 80s, with the HIV and AIDS crisis that hit our community. But
it goes way back.
Prior to that, I didn't know anything that happened. And, I was shocked to think that, the colonisers of this country wanted the death penalty for 2 things, murder and sodomy. And we were, that was the sentence. We were sentenced to death for being ourselves. I found that really emotionally, I don't know what the word is, but it just completely flooded my brain with shock. I was, wow, these people lived through this, and it's all very well for us to go through and say, okay, we had two people that were in the bedroom and the police were spying through holes in the ceiling and catching them having sex. And it's there was this sort of feeling of, it's okay to talk about that, sort of, it's so distant, it's so far in the past. But all these people had lives, and all these people lived, and all these people were persecuted for being themselves. And I don't know, I just feel like, I suppose the British have something to answer for, don't they, in the laws that they brought with them in all the countries that they colonised, because they killed people for it and they made people's lives absolutely hell. And it's just shocking.
In the words of the great Mariah Carey, why are you so obsessed with me, right? I'm watching this like, why are you so obsessed with that? And I think the answer is that we are a threat to this sort of system that they want to perpetuate. And even today, they will keep perpetuating, and it's not easy really to draw a straightforward line to saying, right, so who you choose to sleep with, what does it have to do with your other people's wealth or the other people's idea of what Australia should look like? But I think in a way, whether you pass it through the lens of religion or capitalism, we are a threat to how they consider a good life to be. And I think, so we are still a threat. Don't be fooled by the changes in legislation, and I think we don't get a lot of coverage in Australia, especially about what happens in government. We do hear a lot in recent weeks about what's happening in America, which is a good indication that, you feel like queer people can feel like we live in a time of freedom, but these people, these colonizers, as a short form word to use, are still out there causing trouble for us.
We're chatting to Suzy Wrong about Queerstralia, which is currently streaming on ABC iView, and the third instalment is out this evening. That's the other thing that I really enjoyed about this series. As we've said, we learnt so much, and I guess just as an overview, if you haven't seen the series, basically it's Zoe Coombs-Marr, who's this established Australian comedian, basically interviewing and going around to archivists and historians and also just people that have lived through moments in history and kind of unpacking and then delivering Australia's queer history. One of the really amazing conversations that happened were with the Commissioner Todd Fernandez and another host of the show about sister boys and brother boys in Australian Indigenous history and the fact that they existed long before English colonisation, and they had this queer history that was basically just snubbed out as soon as
the British laws came in.
Yeah, the Victorian Commissioner for LGBTIQ plus communities, his name's Dr. Todd Fernando, is a real highlight of the program. I could watch him talk for hours and hours because I think he's very knowledgeable about, about what this topic through the Aboriginal lens, I suppose, for lack of better words, because I've always thought, we can't always look at history and start where the Europeans arrive, right? Because, but that is how we do things. We look through documents, we look through paper, ink on paper, and see what's documented. But obviously, Indigenous people have been on this planet for much longer than that. And my head is always curious about, but how is it for them? How if I was born as an Indigenous person, I'm saying like a sister girl idea from way back then. How would I imagine the world to be having gone through a process of colonization? How do I imagine my ancestors? I guess that's what I'm reaching for, the ancestral information, which I think I do get very satisfyingly from Dr. Todd.
And it would be interesting to see, let's say, colonisation is not good anyway, but let's say the Dutch had colonised us instead of the English. Would things have been different? Because I imagine they would have been. But something else, Suzy and Em, that I didn't realise, and I don't know, many people will know this feeling. There's a mateship here in Australia. There's something growing up, certainly in my experience as a gay man, you're not part of the boys. You're not part of the boys club. You're not in with it. There's, we are different, but there's a real homophobic mateship about this country that I certainly have experienced in my life and growing up here. And I always wondered, where did it come from? I know it's in other parts of the world as well, but I haven't seen it or felt it as strongly as I do here. And it was interesting that the show sort of filled in the dots, really, and linked it, to the convicts and the slaves when this was a penal colony here, and that we developed a reputation in the British Empire as being a home for sodomites, and there was a lot going on. There were lesbians having sex, there were guys having sex, they were living as married couples. And then it's almost like this country, Australia, developed this sort of paranoia about their reputation, and it just made me think, wow, so maybe that's where the seeds were sown for this culture that is so difficult for us to grow up in.
That was a big part of Dr. Todd's comments about exclusion. I don't think he used the word explicitly, but the colonizers just have a culture of exclusion in so much of how they, or should we say, we do things, We are so used to excluding people. Like we sort of create friends and bonds through mateship, right? But the process of mateship inevitably includes racism and includes homophobia, so that your mate.
It is 5:30 for your Tuesday drive home.
We were chatting to Suzy Wrong about Queer Australia, which is streaming on ABC TV and iView at the moment. Suzy, just in a quick wrap-up, one thing I really love, simplicity of Zoe's presentation and her explanations, the fact that we were only seen as criminals. Every time, the law was against us, therefore we became known as being criminals. I was like, oh, the penny dropped. Of course, it's so simple. She was great at it.
Yeah, I loved it. I highly recommend it. I learned so much. I think that it's a beautiful representation, and really there's a lot of people's voices that we're hearing. So it's not, a one-faceted recount of Australian queer history. It's like a very multi-dimensional, multi-person, multi-interpreted, and just like, I don't know, just a beautiful presentation of Australian queer history. And the Indigenous
voices are telling their story. We're not telling it. Suzy.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah,
Suzy,
I recommend viewers to pay attention to what the Indigenous subjects in the show are saying. I think it's very valuable information there, because it's on iView. You might need to rewind because there's a lot of information packed in there. It's worth it. Rewind and slow down and digest that information. Next week, In Our Blood is a 4-part musical drama inspired by Australia's response to AIDS in the 1980s. It begins this Sunday on your ABC. Musical drama.
A musical drama. Suzy, I love it. Thank you so much for joining us as always.
See you next Tuesday.
That's Suzy Wrong, our theatre, TV and film reviewer.